Ralph Bagnall here for Microjig. Building projects from pallet wood or other recycled materials can be very rewarding. But if you don't have a jointer, your material might not have a prepared edge that you can safely run against the rip fence of your saw in order to prepare it the way you need it. Now, Zach Manring over at southerngingerworkshop.com recently posted a video that we liked a lot, building a trash bin out of reclaimed lumber. And he was using a very clever straight line jig that uses the MATCHFIT Dovetail Clamps to hold the part in place while you cut it off. And he's graciously given us permission to build the jig and share the plans with you. So let's do that. I've got my part cut to about 12 1/4 inches wide. I want it to be 12, and I'll trim the extra off in a minute, but you could make yours wider or narrower depending on the stock you want to use. Just remember that the wider the stock you use, you're going to need to increase the width of your panel. You want it to be wider than the type of stock you want to be able to use because you still have to be able to clamp it. You still need a little bit of room for that. So now what I want to do is I'm going to set my rip fence for right about 12 inches because that's what I want to actually cut at. But I want to trim this edge so that once I put my zero play guide bars underneath to guide the thing, I'm going to use the saw blade to rip it off so that without using my rip fence, the jig will work guiding off of the miter slot, and I know that this will be exactly along the cut line. But when I drill the holes to mount my zero play, I don't have to make them exactly perfect. All I need is just to mark about where the center of my miter slot is, and I'll create a line all the way down, and I'll drill some mounting holes along that line. It doesn't matter if it's a little bit off to one side or the other after I'm done mounting everything, because I'm going to use the saw to trim it off square. So because I can, I'm going to use a fence on my drill press to drill these holes. I've got a dovetail slot in the bottom of my drill press fence, so the MATCHFIT Dovetail Clamps are how I hold it on, and it's very quick and easy. And because the screws are 1032, I would normally use something like a 3/16 bit. I'm using one a little bit larger, not quite 1/4 inch. And I'm letting the spur in the center of the Forstner hole guide my drill bit so that I know it's centered. And now everything's lined up. I've got my holes drilled for mounting my zero play guide bars underneath my sled. Now, while it's not strictly necessary, I do prefer to cut a relief channel before I mill my dovetail slots, about a 5/16 of an inch deep and 1/4 inch wide. I'm using a box joint set here, but a dado, the outside cutters for a dado set would work well. This just gives me cleaner dovetails with less sanding and cleanup after the fact, and it saves a little bit of stress on the dovetail bit, which helps make them last longer. Now, most router tables, mine included, are not going to give you enough room between the fence and the bit to cut that center slot in a base this size. It's about 12 inches. But of course, there is a MATCHFIT solution to the problem. A straight piece of plywood ripped nice and clean, a dovetail groove down the center, and I've got an auxiliary fence. So now we can set up the zero plate guide bars. I like to use a couple of nickels in the miter slot underneath the guide bar to lift it up to the surface, which is where it's actually going to work, so that's where I want to set it. You can use washers as well. Now we're just going to loosen the lock screws just a little bit and then slide the two pieces together until I get a nice fit. Then I can lock it back down again and do the second one the same way. My zero plays are set up properly. I've got my sled all ready to connect to them. I'm going to set my rib fence to the 12 inches that I originally planned on, and as you can see, that actually means I'll cut off this edge, which I want to do so that I have a direct marking of where the blade is going to cut. Now with the fence out of the way, I can go ahead and rip this edge off. Another use for this type of jig is if you want to do something with a live edge piece. Obviously, this side is completely useless up against the fence. It would be dangerous to try and cut it, but I still need to square and straighten this edge here. So I could do it on the jointer, but if you don't have a jointer, then I can line it up. I can do it square. I can set it to a slight angle. I can do whatever I need to do to get the piece that I want. And clamp it in place. Now I'm being very careful to make sure that the clamps themselves underneath here are not sticking out beyond the base. I can feel right across here and they're not. That would be bad. I can reverse the heads on these if I absolutely needed to, but I shouldn't because I've cut this edge right to the blade. And there we've got a clean, straight edge with no burns. It's a very smooth cut, a good blade, a good jig, a great result.
Micro jig. Work safer. Work smarter.